Hey everyone, it's 1 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started with our weekly wisdom webinar. Bear with me as I just finish up a couple last things here. All right, so my name is Chris Berry, of course. We do these once a week, every Wednesday, and then if you can't attend, they're always recorded. We ask that people submit questions ahead of time, and I go ahead and answer the questions live. So it's not really a structured presentation or anything like that. Plus, if you do have questions as I'm going, feel free to put that in the question and answer section. And also feel free to put anything into the chat as well. The more interactive, always the better. I really enjoy these. And we always start with a positive focus, something positive that's happened within the last week. If you want to put something into the chat, something good that happened in the past week, feel free to share that. For me, I'll share two things. One is just personally, my kids, Ryan and Maddie, my son Ryan and my daughter Madison, their soccer season is starting and I'm coaching both of their teams this year. So I'm super excited to be able to do that. I guess I have three things. Second thing is I had a total hip replacement March 9th, and I'm down from a walker to now a cane. So down from 6 legs to now 3 legs, and everything is moving forward with that. So that's good. I'm recovering well. And then professionally, I guess I have two things. One is I had a article published by Forbes talking about retirement income planning. So that was pretty exciting. And then the second book that I've written, just sent that in a rough draft, talking about creating a retirement and legacy blueprint. So making sure your money lasts as long as you do during retirement, and then maximizing it as a legacy for the next generation. So just submitted my first rough draft to hopefully get that published this year. So a lot of good things on my end, and hopefully you have good things happening in your world as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started on all of this. Share my screen. Saw a question come over, Brian. We'll go ahead and address that, but we have a couple of questions to get to first. So give me just a second as I hit this button, I hit that button, I hit this button, hit that, and then that. And in half a second, we should be saying, there we go. All right. Boom, boom, boom. All right. So again, we do these every week. Very important to understand that this is kind of general information. So if you want to see how this applies to your own situation, as always, reach out to us via email, book some time on my calendar, give us a call. We'll go ahead and answer those questions. This is kind of general advice based on kind of questions submitted. So a good number of questions, plus we had another question come in. So I'll go ahead and get started. First question was, I'm 80 and retired. Can I contribute to a health savings account as a tax savings vehicle? So typically, and again, we've talked about this before, but think of it as we've talked about 3 tax buckets, but in reality, there's 4. And we'll talk about why that 4th one is more of an issue these days. But think of it as we have taxable accounts, we have tax deferred, and then we have tax free. Taxable accounts would be like checking savings, money market, brokerage accounts. Tax deferred are your typical IRAs, 401ks, 403bs. Tax free would be things like Roth IRAs and 401ks. Cash value life insurance, health savings accounts, 529s, right? And now here's that 4th bucket that has become more of an issue recently. And we will call this tax-free plus. Because when we talk about the tax-free bucket, we're talking about it being income or growth tax-free. But when we talk about tax-free plus, we're talking about estate tax-free. And so one of the questions was getting into this idea that estate taxes might drop, or the estate tax exemption might drop. So everyone is so focused on Roth IRAs because Roths grow tax-free, but keep in mind, Roths are not estate tax-free. So if you leave a Roth account to the next generation, understand that depending on where estate taxes go, those might be taxed at the estate level, not at the income level, but at the estate level. So that's where we're looking at things like irrevocable life insurance trust. So life insurance, again, IUL, can be estate tax free depending on how we set it up. And there's also some charitable options as well. Now, getting back to the question here, can we do a health savings account, which is a tax-free growth vehicle if I'm 80 and retired? Typically, health savings accounts, you will not be able to contribute to those once you're on Medicare, once you're over the age of 65. So if you're looking at moving money from the tax-deferred accounts, then typically the big ones we look at are Roths and IULs, okay? 529s maybe make sense, but really, typically we're looking at doing like Roth conversions, which may or may not make sense. And again, the Roth conversion is not the end all be all. There are other options to move the money to tax-free or tax-free plus. So again, if you're 80 and retired, can you contribute to a HSA? No. Instead, I'd look to doing Roths, maybe life insurance, probably not life insurance just based on age. So most likely it would be a Roth if you are 80 and retired, okay? All right, a question that just came in. Let me just go ahead and answer this. The question is, what is the best way to get started with you if you want a comprehensive plan with all the associated legal documents? Do you recommend in-person visits or do you use Zoom calls with potential clients? So the best way to get started is to contact our office, give us a call or shoot us an email. Phone number is 844-885-4200. Email, just reply to one of the emails or the email that invited you onto this. And then what we do is we send out a short personal information form. It's only about 4 pages, just gathering some basic information. And that's really our starting point. And then from there, we have a conversation. A lot of times we're doing Zooms just like this. I've done 2, 3 Zooms today, I think, where you can be in the comfort of your own home. We figure out where you're at, figure out where you want to go. And if there's a gap, we talk about how to close that gap. So just give our office a call and we can schedule a time that's convenient to you to get started on this. It's a lot of questions where you ask me questions, I ask you questions. We figure out what are your goals. We figure out the best strategies to help you achieve the goals. And then we kind of pick the right tools. Maybe it's a castle trust, maybe it's a revocable trust, creating that legal structure. A lot of times that makes the most sense. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, number 2, I have a castle trust. Do Roth conversions make sense? So let's talk about that castle trust again. So typically we kind of have 3 types of trusts that we do in our office. We have a basic revocable living trust. We have a revocable living trust, we call it a legacy trust, and then we have a castle trust. So the revocable trust, what it does, avoids probate, outright distributions. Legacy trust does that, but protects the kids or protects your beneficiaries, giving them the opportunity for a lifetime of asset protection. Castle trust does all of that, plus protects you. Protects you from 2 things. One would be creditors or lawsuits. The big one for a lot of my clients is long-term care costs. So keep in mind, each one of these kind of builds on each other, right? So one of the things to think about with that castle trust is to understand that the castle trust, to build in the protections, it needs to own the asset. So it needs to be the owner of the asset. So it needs to own your home, own that second piece of property, own that business you might have. but then it needs to own the investment accounts. And so getting back to what we're talking about up here, if we're looking at minimizing taxes, we kind of do have a two-step process. First, how much to move, right? How much do we move out of those pre-tax accounts? Okay. And we look at your tax brackets. Right now, if you're like a lot of our clients, maybe $100,000 worth of income in retirement, that puts you in the 22% tax bracket. We fill that up with about $80,000 we could move, and then moving it to the next level. A lot of times we might want to get into the next tax bracket, which is 24%. So I was sitting down with a family last night or yesterday. They had about $100,000 of income. We talked about potentially moving $229,000 out of those pre-tax accounts to something tax-free, because we know their 22% tax bracket's going up to 25 whenever the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act ends. So we calculate how much to move. In that situation, they had $220,000. Now, the kind of Susie Orman, the very general recommendation is just do a Roth conversion, right? And that's where I get into kind of these levels of like planning that you can have. So at the most basic level, you have your vendors, like your Vanguards of the world, your Fidelities of the world. Even on the estate planning side, we see just your basic estate planning attorneys. You walk in there, you get a revocable trust, they send you on your way. On the investment world, it's like the Fidelities. Okay, you're looking for a mutual fund, they give you a mutual fund. Vanguards, they give you a investment account that's low fee, right? But it's more for do-it-yourselfers. And then a step up from there would be kind of your investments or your broker dealers. I don't want to get into naming names, but these are kind of financial professionals who just talk to you about your investments. And they'll say, hey, I recommend you do a Roth conversion, but they don't really give you any tax planning advice. They don't give you any real holistic advice. And then what we're talking about is really holistic, comprehensive advice that's taking into account legal, financial, and tax planning, right? And so the basic answer that you're going to get from these people, if you're concerned about taxes, is do a Roth conversion, right? And I'm not anti-Roth conversion. I'm just saying there's other options that may be a better fit for you, right? And so understand that if you have an asset protection trust, understand that we can only invest non-qualified funds or say cash value life insurance. What that means is your pre-tax IRA or your Roths are going to be outside of that castle trust because they're qualified accounts. They have to be in your name. So like the family I was sitting with yesterday, instead of doing a Roth conversion, because that money is not going to be protected, we're moving that money, or we're looking to move that money into out of the IRA or the 401k, the pre-tax accounts. What we're moving it into is a brokerage account that's invested inside of the trust, as well as we talked about doing cash value life insurance that's invested inside of the trust. So in their situation, a Roth IRA, a Roth conversion didn't make sense. And again, there's like basic answers that are kind of general advice. When you go online or you talk to kind of a vendor or someone who's going to just talk to you at a very basic level, Roth conversion makes a ton of sense. And I'm not saying not to do Roth conversions, but I'm saying there's other things to consider, other things to think about. So if you do have an asset protection trust, maybe do a Roth conversion if you think you're going to use that money soon. But if you're really looking at protecting the money, maybe we look at, in terms of legacy planning, like life insurance inside of the trust that you could access in the future, or even just a brokerage account that's invested inside of the trust versus the Roth conversion. So again, Roth conversions are great. It's a starting point, but it's not the magic wand. It's not perfect for anyone. And really anything that we're talking about, again, you need to see how it applies to your own specific situation. And that's why really this is what we're talking about, is how does this, any decisions we make, how does it affect you from a legal, financial, and tax standpoint? Not just what is the best rate of return I can get, but what is the best move overall? Because all these pieces are connected. A couple of follow-up questions. So a brokerage account inside of the Castle Trust is still an IRA? No. An IRA is an individual retirement account that has a very specific tax qualification. So keep in mind that, like, you might like XYZ mutual fund that's inside of your IRA. We could do XYZ mutual fund inside of the Castle Trust, okay? An IRA is like a wrapper, okay? It's a pre-tax wrapper, okay? So if you really like whatever investment you have in your IRA, we take it out of the IRA, we pay the tax, and then we invest in the same exact thing, but now it's owned by the Castle Trust. And you can have it invested at the same exact place. So if you're dead set on using Schwab or TD Ameritrade or Vanguard, we could have an account that's now owned by the trust that's asset protected, that's a brokerage account. But now it's outside of the wrapper of the IRA, which is important because the IRA, anything you pull out of there is taxed. And then B, now it's invested inside of the trust and it's protected. Here's a question. Will you claim income and pay tax on the investments inside of the Castle Trust? The answer is it depends. The assets inside of, or the investments inside of the trust, if we're to do it inside of an IUL, it's completely tax-free. If we're to do it in a brokerage account, you might have capital gains, maybe, but there's ways that we can structure it so it doesn't have any type of tax impact. And there's a variety of reasons or a variety of ways that we can do that. One, we can look at things that are still tax deferred that get a step up in basis upon death. Joe, to answer your question, maybe, but if taxes are a concern, the first thing is understand it's not going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So if you put in $1 million into the Castle Trust and then you pull out that $1 million, zero tax on that, okay? The only potential tax would be on gains, but there's still ways that we can mitigate that. So if being completely tax-free is still important, we can still do that inside of a Castle Trust. It's just that we do it inside of the wrapper of the trust versus inside of the wrapper of IRA or in your name. Another question, do qualified accounts, IRAs and 401ks receive any asset protection in Michigan outside of a Castle Trust? They are protected. So these are your IRAs, your 401ks. They are protected from creditors. Your IRAs are protected up to $1 million and change. Your 401ks have no limit on the creditor or bankruptcy protection. But there is zero asset protection from long-term care. So if you're to need a nursing home or Medicaid, keep in mind, and this is why a lot of people look to move money out of those IRAs, 401ks, long-term care could eat up those accounts, right? So again, people are moving money out of those IRAs for two reasons. One, they're not protected from long-term care. Two, taxes going up in the future, okay? So no, your qualified accounts are not protected from long-term care costs in Michigan. They are protected from bankruptcies, not protected from long-term care costs. All right, number 3. So that is number 2. Number 3, can you give your first impression of the Sanders Senate bill reducing estate and gift tax exemptions? Yep. So I don't like to spend too much time on proposals. One more question before I get into it. If you want to put an IRA into a Castle Trust, you have to pay taxes before. So yes. So anytime you move money out of IRAs, you're going to have to pay tax. We call this the always tax bucket. And here's the thing, we know taxes are going up in the future. So just from a tax standpoint, I have a lot of clients where we're moving money out of the IRA, paying the taxes now. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. You don't want to do it, but it's going to save you further pain in the future. So you pay the tax on the IRA. It makes typically good sense from a tax perspective. And then second, now we can get it in the Castle Trust where it's protected, okay? All right, so number 3. So we have this estate tax proposal. One thing I like about this, I think it's only 19 pages versus the last Coronavirus Relief Act, which was 5,000 pages. But I don't like spending too much time on proposals, especially if it doesn't really have everyone's support. But there is a proposal right now. And the main thing is with regards to estate and gift taxes. And this really is, especially if you're concerned about these things, This is a huge, huge, huge opportunity, okay? If you have an estate tax issue. And this is a huge opportunity, and it's a window of opportunity. So here's the thing. Right now, we have an estate tax exemption that's called the unified credit. And it looks at estate taxes as well as your lifetime gift taxes. So how much you gift away. Right now, this exemption is at $11 million. So over your lifetime, you can gift up to $11 million without paying any gift taxes. And then when you die, whatever you leave to the next generation, as long as the amount you've gifted plus what you leave to the next generation passes with zero estate tax, zero gift taxes. You still have to worry about income tax like pre-tax IRAs and 401ks, but we have this exemption. Now, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, which is scheduled for 2025, could be sooner, could be extended, this amount is dropping down to $5 million. And then Bernie Sanders, this came in the Senate recently, wants to even lower it to $3.5 million. All right. So the first thing to think about is, okay, if I add up the value of my home, my pre-tax accounts, my Roth IRAs, again, Roths are not estate tax exempt. Add up the value of all of this. My life insurance, if it's not in an ILIT, irrevocable life insurance trust, if it's not over here, add all of that up. If it's more than $11 million, we need to consider estate taxes. If it's more than $5 million, we really need to consider it. If it's more than $3.5 million, we really need to consider what is your estate tax plan. And here's the thing. So we have this window of opportunity, and we have a private letter ruling from the IRS because there is a question. Because we know this estate tax exemption is dropping down to $5 million and maybe even $3.5 million. And it's not just estate taxes, it's also gift taxes. So what happens if you gift $5 million right now, but then the estate tax exemption drops down to $5 million in the future? Have you lost all of that? Well, what they've said, what the IRS said, is that when you gift, so let's say it's going to drop down to 5 and 3.5. So let's say you had a $11 million estate. Could you gift $6 million right now? What happens when the estate tax exemption drops to $5 million? Well, what they've said is that money that you've gifted would be free and clear and already out of your estate. So they'd grandfather that in. So I had a discussion with clients, just ballpark things. They had $6 million, right? And now with this estate tax exemption potentially dropping to $3.5 million in the future, what we talked about is they could gift, say, $2.5 million right now. We would put this into what's called a family inheritance trust. So it's out of your estate. They could still control it. And then they could control the spigot where if they wanted, while they're alive and well, if they wanted to get this money to the kids, they could do it. But what we did by doing this now before the estate tax exemption drops, we've removed $3 million from their estate so that if that estate tax exemption does drop down into the future, we're grandfathered in. So if you do have an estate that's greater than, say, $3.5 million, this might be some strategy, just one potential strategy we might want to look at based on the fact that this new bill that's proposed is going to take that $11 million exemption, and now it's going to potentially lower it to $3.5 million. And so there's some things we want to do now to take advantage of this window of opportunity. More advanced and complicated, but if you do have an estate, adding up the value of your IRAs, your 401ks, your real estate, your Roth accounts, if it is greater than $3.5 million, based on this proposal, we might want to consider doing some things this year because this could be in effect as soon as next year. So that's that opportunity and window of opportunity that I'm talking about. Question came in. Do you do the funding over a period of years to go into the higher tax bracket, or in 1 year to pull it all out of the IRA and put it into Castle Trust? Again, this is where we get into the art and the science and the art. The first is how much do we move? Second is where do we put it? And really it starts with what your goals are. I have like a client, husband and wife's diagnosed with dementia, super concerned about long-term care. We liquidated the whole IRA in 1 year. Granted, we paid more taxes, but we wanted to get in the Castle Trust to start that 5-year clock. I have a lot of clients who they just retired, and so we're going to pull the money out of the IRA over a series of years as we're funding the trust. So right off the bat, they have 25% in the trust, 75% out, and then the goal is in 5 years they have a majority in the trust and minority outside the trust. Vicki, to answer your question, it really depends on what your goals are. That's kind of where some of the counseling comes into play of what your situation is. Another comment, I have a sister who could really use the family inheritance trust. Her net worth is, we won't get into it, but she lives in Florida. Can you help her? The answer is yes. So one of my colleagues is actually licensed in Florida and he's in Michigan with me. So we can do estate planning for clients who are out of state. Yeah, more than happy to help. And again, what we would do is start with just that initial conversation to figure out what are the goals, and minimizing estate taxes is one of the goals. We'll talk about that, and then we'll develop the best strategies. This is just one of the strategies, and then we'd pick the right tool. So maybe that family inheritance trust is the tool that we choose. But again, we'd walk them through first, what are the goals? Let's pick the right strategies. Maybe there's a charitable interest. That might change some of the tools we might use, and then we pick the right tools. Can you have more than one trust at a time? Yes, you can. So you might have your basic revocable trust, then you might have a family inheritance trust, you might have an irrevocable life insurance trust, maybe we have a castle trust, maybe you have a child with special needs. We would set up maybe a third-party special needs trust. So I'm not a big fan of adding complexity unless we need to. So yes, we can have different trusts or multiple trusts, but first, again, we'd have to figure out what is your goal, what are the strategies, and then pick the best tools. And maybe based on what your goals are, we might have multiple trusts. So this family inheritance trust would be typically another trust on top of whatever other basic estate planning we might do. All right, that brings me to number 4. Plowing right, whoops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. We want to talk about number 4. Number 4, should I do a Roth or a LIRP given my taxes might go up? So LIRP, this is a acronym created by a friend and colleague of mine, stands for Life Insurance Retirement Plan. Life Insurance Retirement Plan. Really all this is IUL. It's cash value life insurance. And again, we talked about if you're looking at pulling money out of the IRAs, where do we want to put it? Typically, we have kind of 2 main options. We look at doing Roth conversions, or we might do cash value life insurance. So as we pull money out of the IRAs, if we're looking at something tax-free, we might go Roth, we might go IUL. Also, we might just go plain investment account as well, okay? And it really just depends on what your goals are. I would say Roth, typically if you want income right away or sooner. IUL would be income, more of a death benefit. Also, this could be long-term care benefits as well. Plus, it could be estate tax-free. Brokerage account or investment accounts, advantage here, it's very liquid, can be in the trust, just like IUL can be in the trust. So again, let's figure out what your goals are and then pick the strategy and tools. But a lot of times it's some combination of both. So I have some clients that like, let's say we're moving $100,000 out a year, maybe 100,000 goes to Roth and $100,000 or 50,000 goes to Roth, 50,000 to IUL. It really just depends on what your plans are. Here's a question. Are you an affordable lawyer or cream of the crop that people can't afford? What is the usual fee range for a typical estate plan? Really, it depends. And so we have different plans based on what you're looking at doing. I would say we're comfortably expensive, but that said, it's not tied to the size of your estate or your net worth or anything like that. It's really just about what your goals are. So we have plans starting at maybe $1,000 to over $10,000. And it just depends on what your goals are. It's not tied to your estate or your assets. I've had clients that had a home and $50,000 and they wanted to set up an asset protection plan. I've had clients that have $2.5 million and they just want to avoid probate and do a simple will-based estate plan going out right to the kids. So we work with clients kind of wherever they are. But that said, I would say that we're comfortably expensive in the sense that we're not just going to give you some cookie cutter type plan. We want to figure out what are your goals, figure out the best strategy, and then pick the right tool. If your number one concern is price, working with us isn't going to be the best option. You can go online, go to LegalZoom and download a trust for probably $50, right? But if you value protecting everything that you've worked so hard for, and you want to partner with someone who will help protect that from probate or long-term care costs or lawsuits or taxes, then we might be a good fit. But if price is your number one concern, I'll probably say we're not going to be the best fit because we're not looking to be the cheapest out there. We're looking to make sure our clients achieve their goals. Another question, can you explain IUL for long-term care? How does that work? Yeah, so when we're setting up a IUL policy, and again, I don't like to get too much into specific tools because I don't want it to come off as like I'm trying to sell you on something. But that said, this is a complicated tool. So when we're talking about IUL, kind of think of it as a pie, okay? And depending on how we structure it, can provide different benefits depending on what your goals are. But typically when we're looking at this pie, it can be split up into different things. So one would be income, so tax-free income, okay? So if you want tax-free income in retirement, we can structure the IUL so it can provide tax-free income. Also, it could be set up as a legacy play, right? If you look at your investments and everything you've accumulated and say, hey, you know what? There's going to be some portion that I'm not just going to need during my retirement, and I want to leave more money to my kids or grandkids, then just kind of thinking big picture, every dollar you put into this could be $2 of tax-free death benefit to the kids or beneficiaries, right? Where we get the leverage of life insurance, right? So yeah, we could do Roth conversions, and now you have $100,000 Roth going to the kids, which are tax-free. But depending on your age and health, and again, this isn't just for young kids. I have clients who are 65, 70, and older doing this. If we can leave instead of $100,000 or $1 million to the kids inside of a Roth, but instead now it could be $2 million tax-free. That could also be estate tax-free. We're creating some leverage there. So it could be a legacy plan, or we could also add in long-term care benefits. And so typically what happens is that long-term care benefit or death benefit could double as a long-term care benefit. So if, let's say, we have $1 million worth of death benefit, depending on how we structure this policy, that $1 million could go to the death benefit or the long-term care benefit. Where if, let's say, we needed $500,000 of long-term care benefits during our life, that means of this $1 million pie, now there's going to be a death benefit going to the kids of whatever's left over to that. So it's a way that we can leverage for not only long-term care, but also death. And so what we do when we're utilizing an IUL, if that's going to fit into the strategy, is we prioritize. Okay, what's most important? Is the most important thing tax-free income? Okay, then we're going to structure the policy different, and maybe we don't add on that long-term care benefit, and it's more geared towards having this like tax-free death benefit or tax-free income benefit. Or I was sitting with some clients yesterday, they were fine in terms of income. So really we structured their entire policy more for a death benefit so that we're maximizing the death benefit, right? So there's different ways we can structure it based on what your goals are, okay? So that's a short explanation of IUL. All right. Number 5, if a person has IUL for 30 years then decides they don't need the life insurance, can they cash it out? The answer is yes, assuming it is truly IUL. There's a lot of different types of permanent life insurance. Some of them do not have any type of cash value, but even like the policy I showed some clients yesterday who are only interested in death benefit, if they decided to change their mind, so we're setting up this death benefit to be invested inside of the Castle Trust, or the IUL to be inside of the Castle Trust, and we structured it for a death benefit for the kids because they said, you know what, we have enough wealth to see us through retirement, so let's carve out a portion to give the kids $2 on every dollar invested and do it inside of the Castle Trust. But the way the policy is structured, if they change their mind, they still could pull the money from the policy in the future. So typically the way we structure it is you can always pull the money if you want it in the future. If you're looking for growth, would you recommend FIA or a brokerage account? FIA stands for Fixed Index Annuities. There's lots of different types of these. A lot of the ones in the past were more geared towards income, but I see a lot of people moving forward with growth ones. So this gets into what I call the pick 2 conversation. And again, these are just tools. It's all about figuring out what your goals are. So any investment really has 2 out of 3 characteristics. So first would be growth. Most people want their money to grow. Second would be safety. You don't want to lose your money, everything you worked hard for. And then third, you want liquidity, right? We want to get access to our funds. And if you think about it, any investment really has only 2 out of 3 characteristics. So safety and liquidity, think of this as money that you have in the bank, sitting in checking savings. We call this your now bucket of money. Think of it as money you might need over the next year. So this should be like your checking, savings account, money markets, any cash, right? It's not growing, but it's good for emergency funds. It's good if you have any big expenses over the next year, et cetera. But I wouldn't have anything more than that sitting in cash, okay? Because you're missing out on growth. It's not even keeping up with inflation. Then we have growth and liquidity. This is investing money in the market, right? We use TD Ameritrade as our custodian. So TD Ameritrade, and we can put together aggressive portfolios. We can put together moderate portfolios. We can put together conservative portfolios. But typically this is going to be in the market and you're going to see some type of variability, right? A lot of people look at, well, what if the market drops? We've been on a 12-year bull run. I want safety, et cetera. So then the other option is we can have money that's geared towards growth and safety, but we have to give up a little bit of liquidity. So short term, we have things like CDs that are typically on a 1 to 2 year time horizon. You might be getting 1 to 2% rate of return on these right now. Just not a good investment because fixed interest rates are so low, right? Like I see people refinancing at 2-3% for their mortgage, okay? That's the positive of low interest rates. The downside is these fixed rates, you're getting hardly any benefit. Likewise, we have what's called multi-year guaranteed annuities. These are typically on a 2 to 5 year time horizon. You might be getting, say, 2 to 3% rate of return, okay? Now, both of these are strictly fixed, okay? Meaning whatever that contract says, that's gonna be the rate, and it might be 2.25%. So you're gonna get that over that period of time, which keeps up with inflation maybe, but really not much more than that. And then this is where we get into FIAs or IULs. And here you're going to see a fixed rate, or not a fixed rate of return. It's going to be tied to the index, but on average, you're going to get a 5 to 8% rate of return, okay? And if the market's going kind of up and down, with these, typically they index every year, every couple of years. So you see growth more like that. And so typically we want to have our now bucket of money. So how much do we need maybe over the next year, our emergency fund? And then everything else typically is invested on one of these other lines, okay? And getting to the question, FIA or brokerage account, really it's a combination of both. Because with a FIA, typically you're looking at rate of returns of anywhere on average over the last 10, 20 years, 5 to 8%. But I was looking at a FIA with a client yesterday, not that it was doing this every year, but one year it got a 40% rate of return, right? And it has that downside protection, okay? So yeah, I think FIAs or IULs could be a tool. And I'll caution you, there's a lot of people that sell, all they do is sell that. And so for anyone that walks in their door, like I talked about over here, all they are is they're a vendor. Like if you go to your bank or you go to a lot of these quote unquote financial planners who aren't attorneys, they aren't investment advisor representatives, they're not true fiduciaries, they'll sell you a FIA or IUL, but it might not be in your best interest. So again, I want to focus on goals, then develop the strategies, and then get into the tools. Is a FIA geared towards growth a tool that may make sense? Yeah, but let's make sure it fits into your overall plan, okay? Before you just rush out and get one from your banker or someone that gives you a dinner seminar and everyone that walks in their door gets a FIA, or they're trying to pitch you on IUL. And we see this in the attorney world, where you walk into some of these just basic estate planning attorneys, everyone's going to walk out with a revocable trust, whether they need it or not. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of basic revocable trusts are oversold by a lot of attorneys. Because we can accomplish those goals sometimes without even using a trust. And again, it gets into your goals, strategies, and then tools. Comments, you know your stuff, glad to have found you. Thanks, I appreciate that. Another question, this was the first one. Do I ever recommend ladybird deeds and payable on death or TOD over other ways to designate beneficiaries? Of course, yeah. So, and this is actually exactly what I was talking about. We don't always need to use a trust. Like if your only goal is to avoid probate, then we need to just focus on avoiding probate, and we need to understand estate administration. And there's 4 ways assets transfer out of your name. First would be joint ownership. This is good for married couples, but don't ever name your kids joint to your real estate and stuff like that, because you're opening yourself up to all the liabilities. Second would be beneficiary designations. Okay, these are your TODs or transfer on death. So transfer on death, payable on death, naming beneficiaries of your life insurance, 401ks, IRAs. It goes outright to whoever you've named. Third would be through a trust. And again, not everyone needs a trust. It depends on what your goals are. But if an asset doesn't pass through one of these first 3 ways, then it ends up going into probate. And that's what, that's everyone's baseline as it comes to estate planning, is we don't want things to end up in probate, because it's a 5-month process at the very least. At minimum, 3 to 5% of any assets typically get eaten up in fees. Plus it's public. Anyone can see what's going through probate. So most people want to avoid probate at the very least, all right? So can you do it without a trust? Yeah, but the concern is then you're just giving things outright to your beneficiaries. And then if they get a divorce, a lawsuit, creditor action, bankruptcy, then whatever you've left them could be lost, right? So with a trust, one of the main reasons people look to moving to a trust is that that trust can build in a lifetime of asset protection for the kids. So they can be protected for their lifetime from creditors. They can be protected from a divorce, right? We don't want that money to go to an in-law if there's a divorce, and we can keep the money in the family, right? So if one of your kids pass away, we can make sure the money flows down to the grandkids. truly that's only going to be available depending on how the trust is set up. So no, to avoid probate, we don't need to do a trust. And that's what I was talking about is I had clients, $2.2 million, but they said, you know what, we're going to just rely on beneficiary designations and have everything go outright to our daughters. Their daughters were in their 20s, and they said, you know what, we're gone, I don't care. And again, it's not my job to tell you what you need to do. If you're comfortable and you don't want to build in that asset protection for the kids, then we can do it through beneficiary designations. I'm not judging. My goal is to educate you on the options, figure out the best strategy, and then pick the right tools. So no, we don't always have to use a trust. In fact, we don't always use a trust. Okay. Mike, I see your question. That's going to take me a second to read. Phil, your question. If I currently have an FIA, can I move it to one of these without paying surrender charges? So with fixed index annuities, and some other investments, depending on when you get it, there might be a fee to get out of it. And so depending on when you got it, you might have to pay a fee, but depending on how well it did, that might be negligible, easy word for me to say, or there might not be any fees. Plus, depending on what we move it into, there might be some bonuses where it makes it more attractive with the bonuses and the improved rate of return versus where you currently have things. So if you already have, say, a fixed index annuity or specific investment, before we ever move anything, we always figure out where you're at and then figure out where you want to go, and then we'll talk about the pros and cons of engaging in that strategy. So I have one client. She had about 7 different accounts. She had a lot of old high fee variable annuities, and it just made a lot of sense to get out of those. Okay. But that's where we always look to see where you're at, figure out what you want to do, and then we weigh the pros and cons. All right, here's a longer question. The IUL cash value is tax-free when it's withdrawn. However, you're paying a tax in the form of fees. You mentioned an 8% rate of return. My question, is there a study showing the difference in portfolio value, investing in an S&P versus an IUL? Okay, so the question is comparing IUL over time versus an investment. Let me share another screen. So give me just a second. And again, there's no guarantees with these. And again, past performance doesn't equal like future performance, blah, 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 blah. But I'll tell you, I have an IUL. This last year, it has the downside protection, but my IUL gave me a 8% rate of return, which is pretty darn good considering it has downside protection. Let me find, I have a graph. Let me see if I can find that while we're talking here. And while I'm doing this, if you do have any further questions, because I've covered all the questions submitted, please make sure to put the, here we go. Put those in now. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to share a screen that talks about IUL with downside protection over the last 20 years compared to the S&P 500. And again, I'm not sharing this and saying that you should rush out and get IUL or get some type of fixed product. I'm just trying to educate you on something that maybe you're not as familiar with, and also answering your questions. So this is showing an IUL that has an 11% cap. So if the market goes up 20%, you get 11%. If the market goes down, you don't lose anything. And this is taking into account any fees, the mortality expense, et cetera. Really just looking at this as an investment. And 11% cap, they have lowered the interest rates on these. For example, I was working with a client yesterday, and right now they're offering a 10.5% cap, where if the market goes up 12, you get 10.5. If the market goes down, you don't lose anything. If the market goes up 6, you get 6. So there's no like spread or anything. It's just a pure cap. But if we were to compare the S&P 500 over the last 20 years, and this is as of 2020, the red line is S&P 500. So someone asked me the other day, has the market went down 2 years in a row? The answer is yes. So you see that in 2000. In this situation, the IUL would have given you 0. But then as you see the rebounding, you're going to get the caps. So your IUL will continue to grow just like the S&P would continue to build itself back up. Over time, they've actually ended up being about even. But if you look at it, because of these downturns, anything that has indexing typically is going to outperform, say, the S&P. And then the big concern here is that we've been on basically a 12-year bull run from 2008. We did have that drop in March. We did rebound 119 days later. But there is a big concern that if you looked at since 2008, we've been on this bull run, there might be another drop coming, right? And so whenever you see the drops, that's really where anything that has that I as part of the investment, like IUL or FIA, that's where it's going to typically outperform just having the money in the market. And again, I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but just like in my own situation, just like the way that you should be thinking about investing, you should be looking at diversification, right? So you wouldn't have all your money in just one stock typically, right? If you had all your money in Enron and then Enron goes down, you just lost your entire retirement, right? So also think about diversifying the investment classes, right? Maybe we shouldn't have everything in the market. Maybe we should diversify. Also look at tax diversification. Maybe we shouldn't have everything sitting in pre-tax accounts. Maybe we should look at diversifying between tax-free, tax-deferred, and taxable. So just some things to think about. A couple questions and comments. I know my FIA does not give me the dividends, just the price return, so it lags behind the S&P 500. Is that true for IUL? So keep in mind, anything that has indexing, you're not going to get dividends because there is no dividend. You're not actually investing in whatever that stock or investment is. What that's going to do, all they're doing to minimize fees is they're going to look at how the index performed, and that it's almost just like a scorecard. Okay, the S&P is up 10% and your cap is 11, you get the 10%. Okay, there's no dividends. It's not like you're investing in these stocks, okay? And so I see a couple comments talking about dividends and that type of thing. So there are additional fees to keep in mind with regards to anything invested in the market. So yeah, you might get dividends, but also you're going to have expense ratios that are eating away at your returns. They are eating away at your returns than anything in the market, right? So anything invested in the market, typically you're going to have an expense ratio. Anything, and typically we try to get it lower than 0.5%, but especially when we're doing reviews with clients and they have their money elsewhere, especially at some of those vendors, some of those second level brokerage or wirehouses, or a lot of those places that might have just like 2 names or something like that. A lot of times we see expense ratios over 1%. And that's something that you're not going to see in these fixed index products. And again, I'm not trying to push you in that direction. I just want to make sure we truly understand it because there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misinformation. So that's answering some of those. Again, you're not going to get dividends with this, but you're not going to have the investment or expense ratios either. In an IUL, you have to invest 5, 7, or 10 years. Yeah, typically when you're investing inside of an IUL, you're going to want to look at not touching that money for a period of at least 10 years. The reason for that is you want this money to grow inside of this tax-free environment. Plus, with IUL, there is a mortality expense that has to go to that life insurance or death benefit component. Even if we try to minimize that, we still have to have that so that it still fits into section 7702 of the tax code, so it still qualifies as tax-free growth. So even if we're minimizing that death benefit, the first couple of years that you put in is going to go to cover the mortality expense. But then you're going to get the cash value growing with each annual amount you put in, and then you're going to get the compounding inside of this tax-free environment. FIA return chart after tax. Yeah, so if we're looking at a FIA after tax, let me pull one up. Where is it? You're making me dance here. I don't have these handy. Let me see. And again, get any other questions you have while I'm sitting here. Look, oh, here we go. Let's see when this might not be updated. All right, this is going to be similar. So this is looking at a fixed index annuity that has this one does not have a cap. This has our participation rate. So give me a second. So again, similar situation here. We're looking at a fixed index annuity versus S&P 500. Here, instead of a cap, we have a 40% participation rate. So if the market goes up 10, you'll get 4. If the market goes down, you don't lose anything. And again, this is running from 2020. Similarly, March 31st. I'll tell you why these are picked by the companies is because this is at the dip, all right? So if you see this dip that happened in March, understand that it came back about 119 days later. So just take that into account, take it with a grain of salt. But again, if you look over time, you see that it fits nicely into a just diversifying. It's diversifying against market risk, right? And especially, this is a great opportunity when you look at bonds, okay? So a lot of people have this 60-40 portfolio that they think is the magic bullet. Well, guess what? You can, if you do the research on your own, or I can send you some research. Actually, do the research on your own. But bonds are not performing very well right now because of interest rates being so low. And there's a lot of research right now to say that bonds aren't the perfect hedge against equities that they were in the past. So that 60-40 portfolio that a lot of people, especially those kind of do-it-yourselfers, think is a magic bullet, guess what? Those bonds are underperforming and they're not the perfect hedge to equities that they have been. So a concept would be, okay, that 40% that we put into bonds, what if we put it into an alternative, something like this, that we're going to have upside potential. It's a hedge against the volatility of the market, but now it's going to perform better than, say, bonds will. So that's, again, that's a strategy where maybe this tool makes sense. And again, I'm putting the cart before the horse because of the questions that have been asked. Like, people are asking me specifically about FIA or IUL. So I'm talking to you about those. I'm not saying it's perfect for everyone or a magic bullet. There are no magic bullets, but it just might make sense depending on how you want to diversify things. Okay, last question here. With insurance companies offer FIAs that pay the broker and agent commissions, obviously insurance company is incentivizing these investments for their own benefit, but it seems motivate blah, 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 and non-qualified FIAs are tax deferred as well. Yep. All right, so let's talk about fees. All right, so this is a common question. And yes, you have to be careful who you're talking to or where you're getting this, because there are going to be people that will sell you things just to make money, right? Those are your vendors, okay? Again, you're gonna have your vendors, the people at the bank. These are not fiduciaries. They're trying to sell you something, sell you a CD, sell you annuity, sell you Omega. Some estate planning attorneys, they're just off to sell you something, right? They're going to sell you a revocable living trust, whether you need it or not. That's not at all our approach. Let me share my screen. Okay, again, so we have our vendors. Yes, there are plenty of vendors that'll sell you a fixed index annuity, make a commission, and call it a day and never talk to you again. Likewise, you can see similar things in the investment world as well. That's why we think it's important to work with the fiduciary, work with someone who has your best interest. But here's the thing, to be honest, if we're working together, we get paid less on a fixed index annuity or IUL than we would if we were to manage money in the investment. So typically, pulling back the curtain on the investment world, there's two ways people get paid, because obviously no one out here is a nonprofit, right? So a lot of times people and we're no different. We charge a fee for assets under management. If we're managing money in the market, we charge a fee, plus there might be an expense ratio. I'll tell you, for any money in the market, a lot of times when people are coming over from some of these vendors, when we add up the assets under management plus the hidden expense ratios, you might be paying a 2% fee on that per year. Okay. Commissions on a insurance product might be, say, 6%. Okay. Here's the thing. This 2% that you're paying on money in the market, so this is like, I'll name names, Merrill Lynch, Edward Jones, Ameriprise, right? They're going to charge you a fee for assets under management, plus there's going to be expense ratios based on Fidelity even, expense ratio based on the types of investments. And sometimes we see this as high as 2%. One of our goals is to minimize this as much as possible. But understand, this is 2% a year, okay? Every year. Okay. So I don't have time to do the math, but if you have $1 million, 2% every year, what is that going to come out to? Versus a fixed product, a lot of times this is a one-time fee. Okay. So we get paid more on this side of the equation because we have long-term relationships with our clients. Now, here's where you have to be careful. Like I talked about, where are you getting your advice? Okay. Vendors, a lot of times it's like a one and done. They just want to sell you something and then they're gone, right? So I had a client who they were sold an annuity probably 10 years ago. They never heard from the guy again. So his goal is to sell something and then move on, and then on to the next family and on to the next family, right? Where they're just selling a product. Okay. Versus us, we're focused here. We're looking at relationships, long-term relationships. Okay, so that's kind of talking about the commission versus fees. Thoughts on performance-based brokerage fees versus standard management brokerage fee of, say, 75% or 0.75%. I got to run. I am sorry. I'm not a big fan of, let's say, performance fees. I don't think anyone can outperform the market, to be honest. I think they're getting rewarded for something that's to a certain extent outside of their control. The rate of return we get on your investments are going to be completely dependent on what your goals are and how risky or how much volatility we're willing to take on. So I don't think performance-based investing or fees make a lot of sense. I understand where it's coming from logically, but just with my view of the markets and how illogical they are, what we do is we try to put together overall portfolios that meet your goals, versus I'm not trying to get the best rate of return. We're not looking at hedge funds for our clients. A lot of our clients are very conservative. They don't want to lose what they've lost, versus a performance-based fee that would be rewarding someone to maybe take on more risk than they really should in the portfolio. So I'm not a big fan of, say, performance-based fees. All right. So with that, I want to thank everyone so much. I ran a couple minutes long. I do have to run. I appreciate everything. If you do have follow-up questions, feel free to bring them up either on the next call, which we'll do next week. Shoot us an email. We can certainly sit down and see how this applies to you. Thank you so much. Make it a great week.